So the Digitakt II is out and it looks awesome with updated RAM, storage, stereo sampling, and a whole ton more. With all these new features comes a new price tag. And while it's easy to get caught up in the latest gear, there's still a lot to love about the original Digitakt, especially given its new price on the used market.
And if you're wondering why I waited a couple of months to cover this and do this comparison, I wanted to let the hype die down a little bit, let the dust settle, and really compare these two for what they are.
So today we're going to take a look at the differences between these two machines, and if you already own a Digitakt, are all of the updates enough to warrant buying it again for a higher cost? And what about if you're new to the Digitakt? Is it worth grabbing the new one for all of the new features, or can you get away with getting a used one? Then finally, we'll talk some ways to make the most out of the Digitakt for making beats. Timestamps are in the description. Let's get into it. So first, let's talk some of the differences and compare the two. So on the new one, you get updated space to RAM and storage. There's a few new bus effects. You also get a 128-step sequencer opposed to the 64-step on the original. One of the biggest, at least for me, is stereo sampling. That's one of the perks of having a much larger storage space. All of the sampling on the original is mono. It's not that big of a deal, but if you do like to have stereo samples, or if you're sending, let's say, vinyl or something into flip, stereo might come in handy. Another really big update is that you can use all 16 tracks as sample tracks or as MIDI tracks. So on the original, 1 through 8 are your sample tracks and 9 through 16 are your MIDI tracks. But now, let's say you needed more than 8 sample tracks, you could choose and set any of these 9 through 16 to samples, or alternatively you could set 1 through 5 also as MIDI channels. We've also talked a lot about sample machines here on the channel. Slice is one of my favorites, but they've added a new stretch sample machine that's for time stretching and pitching and things like that. So those are some of the differences. There are a few more, but these are the big ones that stand out. But what's the same? The 2 is still a Digitakt, so it is the same workflow. There are some UI conveniences added to the hardware, like you can instantly go to the keyboard rather than having to press a couple buttons to get there with the function. Also, and this is kind of a bummer, MIDI tracks are still for voices. So you can kind of work around that by setting multiple tracks to the same channel, and then you can get polyphony, but you wouldn't be able to play that in. Say you wanted to have a 6-voice chord, you'd have to do 4 on one channel, 2 on the other channel. Bit of a bummer given it's 2024 and things like the SP404 have 32 voice polyphony. With all of these amazing new features, why am I still using the original? So I think first, right off the bat, I just want to say there's no right or wrong answer. This is really going to depend on your use case and your setup and workflow. If what the Digitakt II offers is exactly what you need, then that is the right machine for you. But for my use case, the original is still the same machine I bought for a specific reason. So I want to discuss those reasons with you so that you can kind of see in my own example why I don't need to update to the 2 right now. And if you're on the fence about updating, getting an original for a used price, or staying with the original that you already have, this is just to show what you can use the original for, and maybe you don't need to spend that extra money. So here's what I use the Digitakt II for. A MIDI brain and hub for all of my external gear, a sampler that can do some very unique granular slice sound design and treatment, and finally as an idea generator with its easy to program sequencer and the incredibly powerful per step automation. For all 3 of those things, you can do all of it on the original, and that's why I bought the original. So do I need to upgrade? I mean, it would be nice to have all of those perks, and stereo sampling is nice, but I already have a machine that can do that. So if you are pairing the Digitakt with external gear, you might already have some of these features that you can kind of use in tandem with the original, and then you don't really need the upgrade. So for me, I use the Digitakt with the SP404 all the time. And the SP404 has 16-minute per pad samples, stereo samples on each of those pads, a ton of built-in effects, and all of those pads can be sequenced on the Digitakt. And as we talked about earlier, on the Digitakt, each MIDI track only has 4 voices, but I can program multiple tracks to the same channel and then get more voices. So I could do 8, 12, 16 voices all in one channel, just on separate MIDI tracks. So if I need longer sample time, stereo samples, or additional voices, I can just use the SP404. But as a standalone box, all of those updates do make the Digitakt II quite a bit more worth it. But beyond all of this that we've talked about already, sometimes limitations are a good thing. For example, the SP has a lot of options, but you can get bogged down in those options in putting multiple things on top. With the Digitakt I, you have a very set structure of limitations and what you can and can't do. And it's really fun to try to figure out ways either to work around it or use those limitations to get out of your comfort zone. So with that in mind, let's talk about some ways you can make the most out of the Digitakt. Okay, first up, sample machines changed the game. This came in the 1.5 update on the Digitakt, and you get 4 on the original and a 5th one, as we talked about, the stretch on the new one. Now, I can't show you the stretch because I don't have it. Warp on the original and on the new one work quite well to get something synced in time, kind of a bit of quantized, but you get some weird artifacts. Yeah, let's take that. We could do Overbridge. Yeah. Let's drop it down. We're 3 octaves down, so let's see. Slice Machine is my favorite. It slices the samples into short segments. So if you have a long sample, you can slice it and you can get some really crazy sounds. That's how I created my track Chroma Prism, which comes from a long chord progression sample from the Minilog, and I turned those into short little plucks using the Slice Machine. I'll put a link up here if you want to check out that video. If you do want to find a little workaround to get polyphony on those sample tracks, one thing you could do is sample in a chord progression and then use slice mode to put each of those chords on a slice. Now, you don't get manual slice with either Digitakt, which is a bit of a bummer. If you are looking to up your sample size, sample length, or anything of that sort, check out syncing the Digi with external gear. As we talked about earlier, the SP404 is a really good option. You get a lot of added features, longer sample time, even compared to the new Digitakt. You get manual slice, which is nice, and you also get a ton of effects. But there's other machines out there. MPC would be cool. Even Circuit Rhythm could be interesting. 1010 Black Box, all of that. Just look into a sampler to kind of open up the Digitakt. Also, as I mentioned, for my use case, the Digi works great as a MIDI brain because you get 8 channels of MIDI, or up to 16 if you're using the new Digi. So with those, you can sync a lot of external gear. So all the synths that I have behind me, I sync those to the Digitakt, and I can control them all on individual channels. And you can even use MIDI CC to program the filters on those synths or things like that to the encoders, and that would change per MIDI track. So you could have one, let's say MIDI channel 9 controlling effects on the SP. You could have MIDI channel 10 programming MIDI to the Minilog, and then use MIDI CC to control the filter on the same encoders you were using for the SP one. It can get a little confusing, but if you have like a piece of paper or something like that mapping out your routing, you can just refer to that. Lastly, and this is one that I've only recently gotten into, is Overbridge. So Overbridge is multi-track audio over USB. So this is a great way to create a hybrid setup using the Digi as kind of the middleman between your DAW and your DAWless setup. So for Overbridge, and I'm not sure how full the integration is yet on the 2, but on the original, all 8 of the sample tracks become their own audio channel. Then the external audio gets a single audio track, which is still a little limiting, but still quite helpful. I'll tell you that more about that in a second. But what this means really is that you can have much more nuance and control after a recording session. So for example, if I record a DAWless jam, I now have access to all of those individual tracks from the Digi. So let's say drums, snare, hi-hat, a couple of different samples, and then any sounds I used on external hardware would also be in a track. So if I wanted to fix parts, I can do that. If I wanted to shorten or lengthen segments of a track, I can do that easily in the DAW since it's synced. So there's a lot of flexibility in Overbridge, and it helps to kind of be able to fix any mistakes or things like that. That also adds more of that option paralysis we talked about. So I don't always use it. It's just a nice feature to have. So I hope this video helped if you're on the fence about updating, or if you're just curious to see what's different between the two models. It's very easy to get caught up in the hype of new releases, but previously when the EP133 came out, I made a video all about the P033 and why it's still an amazing sampler. And I just wanted to kind of carry that idea on because, yeah, it's nice to have all the new bells and whistles and all the new gear updates and things like that. But just because a new model comes out, it doesn't make the previous one completely useless. The original Digitakt still does everything it's done for the last 6 or 8 years. So it's still there, it's still awesome. And I just wanted to kind of slow down on the whole consumerism and just look at gear we already own and how we can make the most of it, and why even old gear is still awesome. So I appreciate you hanging out, and if you want to help support the channel, you can head to the channel membership down below. It's the best way to help support the channel, but just hanging out is more than enough. And if you want to see more Digitakt beat making videos, check out this next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.